The ability to speak with confidence and present for impact is easily the most valuable skill you can have in today's world. When you can share your knowledge, you can facilitate change, and when you can facilitate change, well, you can change the world one conversation at a time. But most people think they can't speak articulately, confidently, or with impact. They get choked up by nerves, they lose their words, or that dreaded imposter syndrome shuts them down. Well, I'm happy to say that speaking is a skill that anyone can learn, yes, even you. And that's exactly what this podcast is all about. My name is Kat Matson, and welcome to Speaking with Confidence. Well, hello, and welcome to another episode of Speaking with Confidence with Kat Matson. Yes, I am Kat, and it's lovely to have you here. How are you today? I hope you're having a fabulous one, whatever it is that you're doing. In fact, do me a favour. If you're listening to this on your device, take a screenshot of the episode and share it with me on Instagram. Just tag me at Kat Matson and let me know what you're doing while you're listening. I would love to know. This episode, I'm going to give you a heads up. This episode is different. One, it's the first time I've had a male guest on to do an interview. I actually find that shocking because I really am all about inclusivity. But for some reason, this is the first episode that I've brought a bloke on. And the other reason why this conversation is different is because in today's episode, I'm talking with my guest, James Gauci, about dissenting voices, having a contrarian opinion. The backstory of this particular episode is that I saw James present on a panel about artificial intelligence at a technology conference a while ago. And he had a dissenting opinion and he presented it, even though other panelists didn't agree. And I watched him hold space and hold that opinion respectfully and taking on other people's opinions and argue his case. And it was magic. And one of the things that I know people really fear when it comes to public speaking is, what if somebody disagrees with me? What if somebody asks me a question I don't have an answer to? Or what if I'm not popular? Or what if what I have to say isn't liked by everyone? So that's the context to this particular conversation. Because James is also an industry leader in artificial intelligence and technology from a social entrepreneurship perspective, we also have a pretty juicy conversation about where AI is going, what are the realities, what are the ethics, and what are the moral considerations that we all need to be taking on board. So it is a juicy and it is a big conversation, and it's worth listening to. It really, truly is. So I don't think I need to say much more. James Gauci has been in my circle of technology and digital peeps for a very long time now, more than 10 years. And he's one of the genuine good guys working hard in the space to ensure that technology is used for human good. You're going to hear a lot more about him once you dive into the interview. So with all of that said, sit back, or keep walking or cooking your meal or whatever it is that you're doing while you're listening, and enjoy this really rich and insightful conversation with James Gauci. James Gauci, welcome to Speaking with Confidence. I'm so stoked for this conversation.
Yeah, me too. It's been a long time coming, I feel.
I feel so too. Now, I've just introduced you to everyone, but I always like to hear that introduction again in your words. So before we get into the juice, who are you, James? What do you do? Why do you do it?
Who am I and why do I do it? Two very important questions. I am a dad. I live in the northern suburbs of Brisbane. I have been in the technology industry for over a decade after doing a psychology degree, of all things.
I did not know that about you.
Yeah, and so what I do these days is I have a business, two businesses. One's called Cadent. Cadent is a certified social enterprise. We call ourselves an ethical technology studio. So That means that all the work we do is inclusive, secure, and ethical by design, we call it. So for us, we also donate a portion of our profits to charities each year. So more than 50% of our profits are reinvested towards our mission, which is aligning technology to humanity. So we've donated money to the Gradient Institute and the IEEE SSIT that I'm associated with, particularly in the areas of AI alignment, AI safety, AI risk research and standards development. So
Regular listeners are currently getting an idea of why you're here. Because they're like, oh, yeah, I can see why Kat got this guy on. Yeah.
and that kind of leads me to Ethi, which is our latest product that we're developing and venture. We're building a product that helps organizations adopt responsible and ethical AI governance in their organizations, and doing so in a way that doesn't set you back hundreds of thousands in consulting fees. So that's something we've been working on for about 6 months, and something that we're hoping to release the first public iteration of in the second half of this year.
That's so very exciting. Very exciting. Now, before we get into the governance then of AI, I do want to talk with you about the whole AI piece. I'm actually not sure if I've spoken much about it on the podcast. I do in general. I'm a bit of an AI cynic. I'm kind of like, oh, God, can we stop talking about ChatGPT writing your freaking sales pages? Like, stop it. One, that's not artificially intelligent. It's just... Anyway, I'll get off my soapbox. James, from a much bigger picture perspective, what are the opportunities that AI is presenting to us?
Yeah, I think it's really easy to forget to scope this conversation, because AI as a topic has been around for 60 plus years, and we've been trying to create these artificially intelligent systems for a very long time. And this latest iteration has really hit the mainstream largely because of its general applicability. Large language models and image diffusion models and things like that, they're readily applicable and usable by anyone. And it's the first time that AI has reliably and in an open form way just generated content for us, which is really exciting and fun to use, fun to play with. And of course, the companies make it free because they want to train on all that data. But this concept of AI opportunities is really around the ability for systems to be automated in their prediction, automated in their decision making, and automated in the generation of new information or new content. And what we're seeing is this generation piece occur for the first time in a way that's reliable enough to be useful and fun, but error prone enough to not be readily applicable in risky situations or high risk situations or sensitive situations. So the opportunity here is, yes, there is a huge opportunity for AI to become, for example, recursively improving. So the machine learns from itself and learns from its environment, and then gets exponentially, potentially more powerful and more effective at achieving what? That's a big question, and that's we might get to that. But the opportunity there is that, you know, as humans, we might need to do less of the kind of work that these automated systems are actually good at. And so that's going to pose a lot of challenges to society, challenges to individuals, challenges to groups of people, especially when we're not always great at determining how the decision making is occurring or how that generation of content is actually happening. So yes, lots of design considerations, lots of safety and testing and quality assurance considerations. But yeah, that's why the conversation is so mainstream, and it's happening in governments and in large institutions and large corporations at the moment.
You said something interesting there about, for the first time, you said recursive decision making. Did I hear that right? But,
yeah,
sorry, have I remembered it right?
So a machine learning system has the ability, potentially, if it's sufficiently complex or sufficiently powerful, to learn from itself and test itself. And so that recursion that's called recursion, is when when an output can be input infinitely. Yeah.
God, for me, that feels like sitting at the hairdressers and you're watching all of the mirrors reflect back at each other, and you
Yes.
get that. Yeah.
It's the infinity mirror of,
The infinity mirror,
of AI systems. Yeah, that's 100% right.
Are you seeing then beyond? Like, I'm all for getting rid of the menial tasks that are boring. I'm not for machining creativity and authenticity and personality and conversation, which is, I think, was why I get so frustrated at the moment with the conversation. Here, use this to write your marketing copy. No, write your marketing copy. Write your marketing copy, because otherwise it's all going to sound the same. Same with media, like I'm seeing more and more media articles being written by bots. I'm like, why would I even bother? Literally. What are the opportunities that you're seeing for meaningful use of AI? Noting that both of us have subjective opinions on what meaningful is.
Well, that was actually going to be my answer, because it begs the question. What is meaningful to you? And what do you value? And this is where we get into the ethics and the values conversation when it comes to AI, because as individuals and as organizations and as countries, nation states, we're having to ask ourselves the question, hang on a minute, what is it that we value again? Because we're going to have to get this, if we want this system to reliably reflect to us and perform in a way that is consistent with what we think is good, we have to work out what it is we think is good. And the only way to work out what you think is good is an inherently human process of values elicitation. And so the more complex we get in these technical systems, the more complex we have to get in thinking about who we are, what we value, what our goals and objectives are, what we consider to be meaningful, as you say, so that we can help the system and govern the system effectively enough to be consistent with those values. No easy challenges here.
Well, and right there isn't you just said the consistent values. Right there, I would argue, is the flaw in the logic, right? As by definition, humans have different values. We have, in societies, in organised societies, we collectively agree to a set of societal norms, maybe some rules even. But that's society by society. It's not even country by country, So the whole notion that we can program or consistently, I don't know, what's the word that I'm looking for? Consistently, recursively regenerate more information to output that, I find flawed. But that's okay.
I completely agree with you, and I think that's a bit of a feature of the systems that we're building at the moment. So there's a big push in Silicon Valley for this concept of artificial general intelligence, which is one model to rule them all. It's better than all humans at everything, or it's better than the vast majority of humans at the vast majority of things. And when we say better, better at what? What are we actually measuring? What are those objectives? What are those values? And so there are a few different ways of thinking. This is not the only way. It's more that there are a range of ways of thinking about this, and there are schools of thought like Mustafa Suleyman, for example, in his book The Coming Wave. He outlined this. He advocated for narrowly capable artificial intelligences as a way not only of governing the risks better because we scope the use more tightly, but also in improving performance because we can scope the objectives more tightly as well. And not expecting one AI to rule them all in the way that OpenAI is advocating for example.
Yeah. And I think I just to reassure listeners who are sitting here going, are we about to get into a highly technical conversation about AI? No, we're not. It's all right. I want to also say I'm very aware that regardless of my personal opinions, AI is a technology platform conversation construct that is happening regardless. And so what I do love about the work that you're doing, James, and we'll get into this now, is that governance piece. Tell us in non-technical terms what is going on from a governance perspective, and how is that, I guess, leaning into this subjectivity of what is better, what is human, what do we all agree with, what do we not? Yeah, tell us about the governance piece.
I think it's good to start with ethics because that's where a lot of the conversation has been over the last decade in AI. It's been in this, especially in the governance arena, working out what a reasonable set of values and ethical constructs and risks we want to keep on the radar to make sure that AI systems are operating in ways that are beneficial for people. And so, for example, in 2019, the Australian government published the Australian AI Ethics Principles. That's great. It was based on, in part, on some work that the IEEE did to develop a set of ethical principles for ethically aligned design of autonomous systems. It added a few things as well, certain kind of consumer rights, individual rights to the mix that are particularly relevant for government. However, how many codes of ethics have you signed up for in your career, Kat? I've signed up for a few. I've also signed, that I agree to the policies of many of the organisations that I've worked for, which include things like value statements and ethical objectives and things like that. I think to expect that we kick those goals all of the time is unrealistic, and any consultant in this area will tell you 100% it is unrealistic. Codes of ethics and value statements, they are inherently idealistic. And so when it comes to then governing AI, if we can't even hope to be fully consistent with those values of the groups that we're a part of, let alone know what our personal values are, how do we then reconcile our behaviors to be authentic? And so when it comes to governing AI, it's helpful in this instance to remember that we have our own personal values. The organization has its own, mostly top-down, sometimes bottom-up sets of values. And then societies, we have a set of collective values as well. And so when it comes to governing, we just have to agree on where we agree. Find the middle ground. Find where we can, even if we agree to disagree on some things, we can say, well, yes, obviously we agree on A and B and C and D, things like accountability and avoidance of unwanted bias and privacy and transparency and things like that. But when it comes to things like, I don't know, excellence as an organization, how would we like to measure that? And how would we like to measure that in a way that indicates to us that our AIs are performing consistently with that value that we have as an organization? Or is that even an appropriate value to have as an objective for our AI systems? So I've gone into a bit esoteric kind of area, ethics, values, etc. But this is the preamble to any further conversation, because you can very easily talk about risk management frameworks and very easily talk about systems taxonomies, and you can very easily talk about impact assessments. But if you can't adequately understand what the values of the group of people that are hoping to deploy some kind of AI are, it's very difficult to understand what risks we will perceive and where our blind spots might be, let alone have this expectation that we'll be able to understand what's valuable to other groups of people in our impact assessments. So yeah, it's a tough challenge. But to spin it a certain way, I think this is going to spur a little bit of an enlightenment moment for us, a second enlightenment of society, in trying to make these systems so advanced and complex and replicate human behavior and performance. We have to understand ourselves better.
Yep.
If we hope to imbue these systems with human abilities, we have to instill them effectively with human-type objectives, super objectives and values. So yeah, it's cool.
What I love about that, James, is that reflection that in my model of the world, every time I think about governance of AI, I do think of it as at a really global, mega level. But really, at the end of the day, it's going to come down to organisational and personal decisions about how we use it, and therefore the ethics that we bring into it. And whilst one of my concerns about AI is that it amplifies all of the bad stuff in the world, as well as potentially the good stuff, at the end of the day, human beings somehow always come back to a place of let's not do things that are going to ruin us forever, kinda.
Yeah, it's this classic technology challenge, right? Any sufficiently powerful instrument can be used for good or ill, and I think we've got some societal muscle memory here as well, with the likes of Facebook and subsequent use of that tool by somewhat malicious actors to overthrow nation states. Like, go and watch The Great Hack on Netflix if you can find it, or the dot-com boom, where there was a lot of snake oil salesmanship happening, and a lot of people lost a lot of money. So I think people are now, or society is now at the stage where we're a bit fatigued of the promises of digital technologies, and we expect the people operating and deploying them to behave in responsible ways, and I don't think that's unrealistic. And if AI is as powerful as Silicon Valley is telling us it is, then it's reasonable to expect that society will come back with a set of reasonable controls to protect their constituents, and that's not a bad thing, because heads up, constituents equal your market. You know, like happy and healthy and economically empowered individuals buy things. And so it's this kind of, I don't know if you've seen, Joseph Stiglitz has been doing the rounds recently, promoting his new book with this concept of progressive capitalism. Like, it's not just a financial economic model anymore. We're concerned with sustainability. We're concerned with the long term. We're concerned with the environment. We're concerned with social impact. There's a reason why ESG controls are critical in listed companies these days. It's for exactly this reason. And I think we're going to move beyond compliance over the next 5 or 10 years into actual practices and ways of working that actually result in the kinds of outcomes we want to see. So that's really exciting to me.
I really hope you're right, and I'm inclined to agree. Yeah, I do, and you're right. It's watching what hasn't happened with social media, for example. I go, oh my goodness, really? We're about to do this again. Now, if this was a technology podcast, I would dive deeper into all of those things about AI and how do we actually implement governance, but I'm not going to, because it's not a technology podcast. What I really do want to talk to you about is dissenting opinions and dissenting voices. I saw you on a panel recently at a technology conference, and you were on a panel with a bunch of other AI advocates. Pretty much all of them were just saying, she'll be right, mate, it's all good, and government should get out of the way and just let us do our thing, let us innovate. And you said, yeah, nah. Yeah, nah. Can you, without going into the content of that conversation, because, you know, plenty of my listeners are not into the tech, what went through your mind in that moment of thinking, I disagree with this conversation, I want to present a dissenting voice, and it's not going to be popular? Tell me about that moment. Did you have a conversation with yourself? Did you just go, nah, stuff it, I'm saying it anyway?
So a few years ago, I did my MBA, and in that course was a course on leadership. And I went into the leadership course thinking, oh yeah, this is going to be a bit business science, quote unquote. It's going to be a bit Tony Robbins and, you know, all the rest of it, you know. And that's not me. I've got a psych degree. Like I like it to be crunchy and substantial and genuinely scientific wherever possible. And but what I actually learned, and thankfully that was run by an organizational psychologist, is that authentic leadership is kind of the one for me. Like, that's the school of thinking for me, and that comes from a place of knowing that I don't always think in the same way as most people. And I think that's fair to say that everybody feels that way at some point in their lives, right? But that's caused a lot of insecurity for me in the past. And doing that course taught me that if I can behave more consistently with my values, more consistently with what I consider to be my purpose, then I'll have better life outcomes, sure, and I'll be a better leader of teams, but I'll feel better in myself. I'll feel more fulfilled. I'll feel more satisfied that I'm doing what I can in this big organism of society by being authentic to my purpose and my values. And so I don't know if this makes me silly or what, but I think I'm always the kind of person who runs into a fire in situations like the one that I was in on that panel. And I know we didn't want to get into the content, but there was just one comment that really stuck in my craw. I mean, I was asked a question, what are the challenges or opportunities that we see? My answer was along the lines of what I just told you, which is, I think we're going to learn a lot more about our own values as individuals and groups and societies, and that's the opportunity that I see. And another person on the panel said, well, I think the whole AI ethics thing is naive. And so I took that as a gauntlet throwing moment, and we were all adults on the panel, and there were some strong opinions being thrown around, and so I'm going to stand up and be authentic to the things that I believe in and the things that I feel that I know, where I come from. I feel like I can come from a place of authority, and as somebody who's been in software teams for over 10 years, I felt that I could kind of go toe to toe with the engineers in the room.
And you did.
Well, I hope so. And I don't think it was unpopular. I think it was unpopular as an opinion with the people some of the people on the panel. Not everyone. There are a couple of people who kind of nodding along. But I think it was pretty popular with the people in the room. And that's a really interesting... I didn't expect that. I didn't expect the level of nods and hmms and laughs and things that I got in that conversation. And I think it was just a bit of a speaking truth to power, speaking truth to the authorities in the room kind of moment. Yeah.
And I think, there's so much to unpack there.
I don't know if you can tell, I had a lot of fun on that panel, and my adrenaline was absolutely pumping.
Yeah, so okay, I'm going to come back to the adrenaline. I'm going to come back to the authentic leadership. it resonated more with the audience than you expected. I think this is actually really important when it comes to, I'm going to say thought leadership as a general broad term. I have noticed that there is a tendency for everyone to start speaking from the same hymn sheet. I remember when I was Chief Digital Officer for the city, everyone was espousing that every business should be a startup and startups are good and all that kind of stuff. And I was just like, no, stop it. Some startups are good and startups are good for certain things. And we also need to support micro businesses and we also need to support, so. But it is interesting, and part of it I think is reflected actually in the large language models. It's easier if we all have the same opinions that we can just kind of herd all the thoughts into. And I think you've tapped into something really insightful there, that the thought leaders are all talking from the same perspective, but actually the audience, the everyday people actually want a different voice. They actually want no, stop. Can we all get off the hype cycle? Can we all get off the love, trust and pixie dust? It's not all hype. There are consequences here. So I think that's really powerful. And it's not going to be for this particular episode. Sorry, listeners. But it's been part of some ongoing conversations I've been having with people around what kind of industry leadership are people looking for. Authentic leadership and adrenaline. Let's deal with the adrenaline piece first. I want to come back to that. So you said the adrenaline was running So you did know that there was some risk there, right? Like you're very comfortable on panels. You and I have been doing panels together and in the same spaces for years. You are very comfortable on a panel, but the adrenaline kicked in. How did you manage that adrenaline in the moment? How did you stay true to your message whilst you were obviously getting this sense that this was risky?
I'm just going to think about that for a second, because that's an interesting question that like requires a bit of reflection. I think the answer that I want to give is I was trying really hard to listen to the things that the other panelists were saying and thinking, what's my genuine response to this? What things do I know about this area? What things don't I know about this area? And sticking to my strengths and then doubling down on those strengths. But also not being afraid to say that I don't know. I was asked what the future of AI looks like, and my answer was like, well, it's like economics. Nobody can tell you what the economy is going to do in the next 12 months. People have a lot of educated guesses, but we can't predict the future yet. And so, just being comfortable to not know as well, and being comfortable to fall on your face. Being comfortable to have somebody kind of dissent to you as well and come back with the counter argument. I think that's a healthy part of having an intellectually honest debate or conversation. There's bound to be a little bit of conflict, and I prefer to have those kinds of substantial conversations than get up on a panel and go and nod and agree with everybody else on the panel. I prefer to have everybody kind of take away something that they haven't heard or experienced before. And I don't know if that's the performer in me from many, many years ago being on stage, but I think there is a takeaway there for the audience, and that we're serving the audience by being genuine in our responses. So I think just knowing what I don't know and knowing what I think I know, and just being mindful of that, responding to the content that's flying around the room. It's a bit of a, I can imagine in some ways it's, and this is a bit of a stretch, but how a professional sports person might feel when they're on the field, or a stage performer is on stage trying to please a crowd. It's the same thing.
And the reason I wanted to call that out, and so thank you for reflecting and making your process visible to us, is so many of my clients say, I just get so nervous that I can't speak. That adrenaline kicks in and I just can't do it. And one of my sayings is we misinterpret our nerves as fear, and then we misinterpret our fear as a reason not to. And so nothing gets heard because we've had that adrenaline rush, and then we go, oh, that's scary, so I'm not going to say anything. Whereas you went through an internal dialogue process while you're on stage, while you're in front of people.
And not an explicit one. I'm trying to make the implicit kind of explicit here. So. Yeah.
No, and that's the whole point. But recognizing the worst that's going to happen here is some people are going to argue with me. That's it. And I might be proven wrong.
Yeah, naming the fear is always a really powerful thing I've found in life, and I'm moving into this risk and governance space, and so I think I do have probably a higher than average level of sensitivity or to things like risk, and so yes, I feel all of those things as well. One of the things that I've had to get over the last 12 months is fear of myself. Does that make sense? And that's where the authenticity comes in. Like, I've always found it easy to do a job and play a role and I'm the facilitator with this framework, for example. That's pretty straightforward. I'm happy in that kind of zone. I've got the answers on the sheet of paper, and if we just get back onto that line, we'll be fine. But getting out there and being myself is probably the hardest role that I've ever had to play in my career. And that's only come recently. So, it's not something, it doesn't have to be a natural thing. It is a skill that you can learn. And I think that's really important for everybody to hear, because some of the quietest people have the most to say. And some of the quietest people have things to say that represent quiet people.
Correct.
And introverted and introspective people. Imagine what an introspective or introverted person is doing all the time. Guess what? They're thinking and processing. So it's really important to represent that group in your work and in your life, I think. And a good facilitator will help that when you're in a collaborative process. But, it's really valuable to learn those skills, to apply them in the right scenarios, to speak up and be heard. Yeah.
Couldn't agree more. In fact, Adam Grant, at time of recording, Adam Grant, the popular author, I was about to say tweeted, but we don't tweet anymore. He threaded. He posted on Threads today about how we often only listen to the confident people in the room, and we really need to learn to listen to the other voices. And I just popped in and said, that's why I do what I do. That's why I teach people how to speak. I want to come back to the authentic leadership piece. I'm not letting you off the hook on that one. You said two things that were fascinating to me. You said that there was something around insecurity and that you had spent a while, feeling insecure in different styles. That was me terribly paraphrasing. And then as you stepped into your authentic leadership, you found your own sense of consistency. And the inference was, James, that has had you feel less insecure. Can you unpack that for me? Because that is gold.
In my work and potentially my life as well, I have had a bit of a tendency to want to please the people around me, to make it so that everybody feels comfortable and everybody feels safe and accepted, and that doesn't always work. It's bound of error there always.
Well, you're not bacon.
So with that comes an ignorance of one's own needs sometimes. And I'm not playing a martyr here, don't get me wrong. But sometimes you play the role that you feel the other person needs to have played for them. And I've learned that I'm pretty bad at that. I'm pretty bad at working out what role that person needs me to play in that moment and trying to be that. So I'm a victim of overthinking interpersonal interactions. And, there's probably some kind of learning and development, Piaget stages kind of conversation there, which we won't get into. But I think...
Another podcast.
Yeah, I think the simplification of understanding what my personal mission is, the kinds of things that I value in my work environment, the kinds of things I value in my personal relationships, being as explicit as you can about those so that you can go back to those as home base. Am I being consistent with my ideal self? And if the answer is yes, then great. Okay. It doesn't matter so much if somebody isn't okay with the way that I behaved, because I know that I value that thing and I don't expect that they have to value that thing. But if I can be confident that yes, my life experiences have led me to value egalitarianism or to value belonging, then if I act consistently with those things, not only am I going to feel more secure in myself, but people are going to experience a more consistent James in their interactions with me. They won't see me trying to be different things to different people. And I thought that was a valuable lesson to learn.
If you're listening and not watching this episode, what you're missing right now is me just sitting here quietly grinning, because there is so much in there around the power of authenticity. And when you are coming from that authentic place, one, it's actually easier to land your message. It's easier to connect. It's easier to express yourself. It's easier to show up. Even if the words aren't perfect, it all comes differently. And two, your self-worth isn't dependent on the response that you get, which is part of part of the issue, right? When our self-worth is dependent on the responses that we're getting from whoever we're talking to, then it's wobbly all the time. Another episode, another time, because we are well and truly over. James, to wrap things up and to lift things up, because this, I must admit, this went down some really deep rabbit holes that even I was not expecting. Can you leave our listeners, as we wrap up, with your number one speaking tip? Because, I mean, you speak a lot on stages as a way of progressing your career and a way of spreading your message. What's your number one speaking tip?
I have to think about that. My number one speaking tip. I've spoken a lot about values, so I'm trying to avoid flogging that message again. I think it's just practice and skills development. Ultimately. My job at uni I was a pub trivia host when I was going through uni, and when I first started, I was just painfully, intensely nervous, and I had all of the performance anxiety. It was more performance anxiety than I'd ever experienced in my life, because it was 10 people just in front of me, and they're expecting me to entertain them and know all the answers.
Yeah,
luckily I had all the answers on a sheet of paper. But that 5-year period where I was doing that for a job just taught me a whole bunch of skills about how to facilitate, how to be in front of people, how to not worry too much if things go wrong, and calling out the thing that goes wrong. That moment of genuineness is like, it humanizes you. It brings the audience on your side. And so my number one tip is to just try stuff. If there's an open mic night for something that you like, or or some kind of meetup where there are regular conversations, just talking more frequently and trying out ideas and asking other people what their ideas are and seeing how they do it. It is a skill that can be learned, and the more exposure you get, the more comfortable you'll feel in those kind of more tense moments.
And it's a skill that you only develop by doing. You can't think your way to better speaking.
I fully agree. As an overthinker, I couldn't agree more.
I didn't know that about you with the pub trivia. One of my training grounds was being a character waitress.
Yep.
So, performing at the table and doing all the thing and slapping not literally, but, slapping around the customers. Yeah. You learn how to manage space.
Yeah.
Freaking love it. What a juicier than juicy conversation, James. Thank you so much.
I hope it was valuable for the audience, and I didn't digress too much. I have a bit of a tendency, so.
I suspect the digressions was where the juice is. So thank you so much for joining me, James. I really, really appreciate it. Where can people find you?
Mainly on LinkedIn. Just search me, James Gauci, Gauci, or Ethe, ETHE, .ai. You can find us on there.
We will post all of those links in the show notes. So wherever you're listening or watching, just look below and you can click through on the links. Thanks again, James.
Amazing. Thanks, Kat.
Oh my goodness. How rich, how deep, and how unexpected. Like, even for me, I did not expect some of those rabbit holes that James and I went down, and I wish I could go deeper. And I'm also very aware that my usual podcast episodes only run for about 30-40 minutes or so, and I'm aware that we are well and truly over time already. So a couple of key points that I want to pull out about that. That conversation about authentic leadership, so powerful. And that piece around being consistent yourself, for James, brought more security than being what he thought everybody else wanted of him. The power in coming back to his authentic leadership, even at an industry leadership space, so powerful, so powerful. I also want to call out that conversation and that reflection that he had about being willing to have a different opinion, and how it might have been uncomfortable from the fellow panelist perspective, but how much it was valued by his audience. I have to say that in my history of speaking up, speaking out, doing all of the things, you never know who's listening. And if you only listen to the loud voices, if you only listen to the people who are on the stage, or if you only listen to the vocal minority, you're often missing the people who you're really connecting with. In James's case, it was his audience that day, but the people who really do want to hear your perspective. So I just loved it. There was so much richness in that conversation. I really hope that you have enjoyed it as much as I enjoy it. And the fact that you're still listening at this point tells me that you found some juice in it. All of the links to connect with James are below. Just click through to ethy.ai or James Gauci on LinkedIn. What a conversation. What a conversation. It would be remiss of me to remind you to pop over to Impactful Presenters if you're not already on my newsletter list. I send out a weekly speakers notes email every Tuesday, almost every Tuesday, with some hot tips, my ramblings, my musings, my thoughts, what's been going on. Very much a working out loud newsletter. And also, if you have enjoyed this episode, please, whatever platform you're listening on, can you subscribe? Can you leave me a review? Because it just helps the algorithm serve the episode up to more people. And the more people like James who are willing to share their dissenting opinions, the more people who have the confidence to show up and participate in the conversations that matter, the better our world will be. Thank you again for listening. I really hope that you've enjoyed this episode. And until I see you again, here's to confidence and here's to impact. I'll see you soon.